Oakland, California, February of 1969. A Tuesday morning, 9 minutes before 11 o'clock, on the third floor of a county administrative building with tan walls and fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency no one in the building could any longer hear. The hallway was 42 feet long and smelled of floor wax and old paper. There were 7 people in it. 2 of them would remember that morning for the remainder of their lives. One of them would not speak of it for 11 years. The officer's name was Raymond Kowalski. He was 31 years old, 6 feet and 2 inches tall, and 214 pounds, most of it distributed across his chest and his shoulders in the way that comes from 4 years of collegiate wrestling followed by a decade of police work. He had been on the Oakland force for 9 years. He had 17 commendations in his personnel file and 2 formal citations for use of force, both reviewed and cleared. He was, by every institutional measure available in that building on that morning, a capable and credentialed man. The girl's name was Shannon. She was 8 years old. She was 4 feet and 1 inch tall. She weighed 51 pounds. She was carrying a drawing she had made the night before of a horse standing beside a river. She was waiting in that hallway because her mother had asked her to wait in that hallway, and she was the kind of child who did what she was asked. What happened in the next 47 seconds would be spoken about in gyms and training halls and quiet conversations between men who had been there and men who had heard about it for the better part of 3 decades. The story would gain details it did not have. It would shed details it did. But the center of it, the hard factual core of it, would not change. Because the man who turned the corner at the far end of that hallway and walked toward his daughter at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, a pace that contained no hurry and no theater, was not a man anyone in that building recognized. He was wearing street clothes, dark trousers, a plain jacket. He was not tall, he was not large. He looked, to every person in that hallway, like a man who had come to pick up his daughter. Nobody in that hallway understood what they were about to see. Nobody in that hallway knew his name. His name was Bruce Lee. In the next 18 seconds, with 4 movements, one of them never completed at full extension, Raymond Kowalski would learn something about the distance between certainty and knowledge that no academy and no personnel file had prepared him for. Stay until the end. Because what Kowalski said from the floor in a voice barely above a whisper would be the sentence that Bruce Lee quoted 6 months later to a room of his closest students. It would become one of the most repeated things he ever said about the nature of a real confrontation. And it began with an 8-year-old girl holding a drawing of a horse. Raymond Kowalski had arrived at the 3rd floor of that building for a routine administrative matter involving a permit renewal. He had arrived 11 minutes early, which was his custom. He stood in the hallway with his arms crossed and his back to the east wall, and he watched the corridor the way men who have spent a decade in law enforcement watch corridors, which is to say constantly and without appearing to. Shannon had been waiting on a bench near the far window for 14 minutes. Her mother was inside an office behind a frosted glass door. Shannon had her drawing on her lap and was adding detail to the horse's mane with a pencil she had brought in her coat pocket. Kowalski watched her for a moment and then looked away. There was nothing about the child that required his attention. She was quiet. She was still. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. What happened next was a sequence of small errors that built on one another the way small errors do, which is to say each one made the next one more likely, and none of them individually appeared to be the thing that caused what followed. A second officer appeared at the far end of the hallway, a younger man named Ferris who had been with the department 14 months. Ferris had been pursuing, with genuine diligence, a man connected to a series of thefts in the warehouse district. The man's description was general, medium height, dark jacket, moving on foot through the administrative block. Ferris had received the radio update 4 minutes prior. He had the description in his mind the way you carry something you are afraid to set down. He came around the corner and he looked at Shannon, and then he looked at the bench, and then his eyes moved to the hallway beyond her, and in that moment, through the frosted glass window at the end of the corridor, he saw the outline of a figure approaching from the stairwell. Dark trousers, plain jacket, medium height. He did not stop to measure the figure more carefully. He turned to Kowalski and said 3 words. Kowalski was already moving. They reached Shannon at the same moment the stairwell door opened. What occurred in the following seconds was not malice. That matters, and it also does not matter. Kowalski, moving with the trained efficiency of a man who had made this kind of intercept before, reached the girl first, and his hand closed around her arm because she was between him and the door, and his training said to move the obstacle and then address the threat. He moved her. He moved her with the force and the certainty of a man who had been wrong about the situation for approximately 30 full seconds and did not yet know it. Shannon's arm broke, the radius clean at the midshaft. She made a sound that was short and high and involuntary, and then she was very still, and then she began to cry. The door opened. Bruce Lee stepped into the hallway. He saw his daughter's face first. Then he saw her arm. Then he saw the 2 officers. He understood the sequence of events in approximately 2 seconds. He had been trained, from the age of 13, to read a physical situation at the resolution that other men read text. And what he read in that hallway he read completely and without error. He did not raise his voice. He did not run. He walked the remaining 11 feet between himself and his daughter at the same pace he had been walking when he came through the door. And he crouched beside her and looked at her arm, and then he looked up at Kowalski. He said, "That is my daughter." 3 words, flat, declarative, not a question. Kowalski said, "Sir, I need you to." Bruce Lee stood up. "If you want to know what happened in the next 18 seconds, make sure you stay with this. And if this is the kind of story that finds you somewhere real, subscribe now. And tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Because what comes next is not about a fight. It is about something that men who have spent their lives training for confrontation very rarely get to witness. There are things that happen before a confrontation begins that matter more than the confrontation itself. Bruce Lee knew this. He had known it since he was a teenager in Hong Kong, studying under a man named Ip Man, who taught him that a fight was not 2 men deciding to hurt each other. A fight was a conversation about space. It was a negotiation conducted in fractions of a second about the distance between 2 bodies and what each body intended to do with that distance. The man who controlled the distance controlled the outcome. Everything else, the strikes, the technique, the speed, was a product of that control, not the source of it. He had taught this principle to 47 students across 3 schools over the course of 11 years. He had demonstrated it in exhibitions in Seattle and Los Angeles and San Francisco. He had described it to journalists and to filmmakers and to men who trained in garages and church basements and rented storefronts. He had never demonstrated it in a county administrative hallway with a fluorescent hum overhead and his daughter crying 6 feet away. He set his jacket on the edge of the bench beside Shannon's drawing. He folded it once along the collar and set it flat. He did not look at Kowalski while he did this. He said, "Step away from my daughter." Kowalski was not a foolish man. He recognized, with the part of his mind that had been trained to recognize such things, that something had changed in the quality of the air in the corridor. He could not have named what changed. He would describe it afterward to Ferris as the feeling of a room when someone turns the lights off and then on again very quickly. A moment of recalibration. He said, years later, that he knew then that he had made an error. He did not know yet how significant. He stepped away from Shannon. Bruce Lee looked at his daughter's arm. He said something to her, quiet and direct, that no one else in the hallway could hear. Shannon stopped crying. Not immediately. Over the course of approximately 6 seconds. She looked at him and she nodded once. Very small. He stood up and turned to face Kowalski. He was 5 feet and 7 inches tall. He was 138 pounds. Kowalski outweighed him by 76 pounds and had 4 inches on him and 9 years of active law enforcement and 4 years of collegiate wrestling and a sidearm and a partner 8 feet to his left. None of those measurements describe what Kowalski was standing across from. What Kowalski was standing across from was a man who had trained between 4 and 8 hours each day, every day, for 23 years. A man whose reaction time had been measured in a university study at 60 milliseconds, faster than the average human blink by a factor of 3. A man who had internalized the geometry of a confrontation to a degree that was not instinct. It was something past instinct. It was architecture. Kowalski said, "Sir, I understand there's been an injury. We need to." Bruce Lee moved. What a trained observer would have recorded had one been standing in that hallway with a stopwatch and the presence of mind to use it was a sequence of 4 actions delivered across 18 seconds. What the 3 people who were present actually experienced was something considerably harder to summarize. Ferris, the younger officer, would describe it to his supervising sergeant 3 days later as follows: "I have seen fast before." That was not what that was. Fast means something starts and then it's over. That was not that. That was like watching someone operate the controls of something from the inside. The hallway was 42 feet long. Kowalski had stepped back approximately 2 feet when Bruce Lee told him to. He was now standing 9 feet from where Shannon sat. Bruce Lee was standing 11 feet from Kowalski, which put him between his daughter and the officer, which was not an accident. This is the thing about distance. A man who controls the space between himself and another man does not need to move first. He does not need to move faster. He needs only to have already decided where the boundary of that space is and to have communicated that decision in a language that does not use words. Bruce Lee communicated it in the way he was standing. His weight was distributed across both feet with a slight load in the rear hip that an experienced eye would have recognized immediately and that neither Kowalski nor Ferris recognized at all. He was balanced the way a door is balanced on a hinge, which is to say he was capable of moving in any direction with approximately equal energy. Kowalski took a step toward him. Second one. Bruce Lee did not retreat. He did not shift his weight. He absorbed the closing of distance by adjusting the geometry of his stance by approximately 4 degrees, which is a measurement so small that no person watching would have consciously registered it, and yet the effect of it was that Kowalski's next step, which was larger and more committed, brought him to a position that was not the position he had intended to occupy. He was 6 inches farther to his own left than he had planned to be. He was also, and this was the thing that would take him several weeks to understand fully, facing slightly away from Bruce Lee rather than directly at him. Second 3. Kowalski reached out. His hand was open, palm forward, the universal gesture of a man who is trying to assert authority without escalating force. His hand moved toward Bruce Lee's shoulder. It did not arrive there. This is the part that Ferris would spend the most time trying to describe, and the part he would succeed at least well. He said the hand went out and then it was back. That was his description. The hand went out and then it was back, and Kowalski's arm was in a position it had not been in before, and his forward momentum had converted into a movement that was neither forward nor backward but briefly downward, and then he was on his left knee on the floor of that hallway. He was not thrown. He was redirected. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole point. A man who is thrown knows he has been thrown. A man who is redirected does not understand for a moment what has happened to his own body, because the thing that redirected him used his own energy as the primary instrument. Kowalski's reach had arrived with force behind it. That force had not been blocked, it had been borrowed. Second 7. Ferris moved. He had been still for the preceding 6 seconds, which was not a failure of nerve. It was the response of a body that was receiving information it did not have a category for. When he moved laterally, cutting left to put himself between Bruce Lee and the exit, which was a trained response and also the wrong response, because it reduced the distance between them in a way that had nothing to do with Ferris's intentions and everything to do with Bruce Lee's. Bruce Lee turned to face him. He did not step toward Ferris, he simply turned. Ferris stopped. He would think about why he stopped for a long time after. He did not have an answer that satisfied him. He stopped because something in the quality of Bruce Lee's attention, which had been on Kowalski and then shifted entirely to Ferris in the space of a single degree of rotation, communicated something that was faster than language and more specific than threat. It communicated outcome, not intention. Outcome, Ferris stopped. Second 12. Kowalski from the floor reached toward his hip. What happened in the following 2 seconds is the reason the 3 witnesses in that hallway told the story differently for the rest of their lives, because all 3 of them saw it, and not one of them was able to agree on the sequence. What is agreed upon is this: Bruce Lee's right hand rose in an arc that began at his side and ended approximately 4 inches from Kowalski's jaw. The distance between the termination point of that arc and Kowalski's face was measured afterward by Kowalski himself with his thumb and his forefinger as the width of 2 fingers. He demonstrated this measurement to his sergeant and then to his supervising lieutenant and then 6 years later to a journalist, and each time he held his thumb and forefinger apart at the same width, which suggests the measurement was not approximate. The hand stopped. It did not make contact. It was held there, 2 fingers from Kowalski's jaw, for a period of time that each of the 3 witnesses estimated differently but that Kowalski described consistently as long enough to think a complete sentence. Then, Bruce Lee withdrew his hand and stepped back. He walked to the bench and he picked up Shannon and he held her against his chest with her broken arm elevated and her head against his shoulder. He picked up his jacket with his free hand. He looked at Kowalski, who was still on one knee on the floor of the hallway, and then at Ferris, who had not moved. The fluorescent lights hummed. From somewhere 4 floors below, a door opened and closed. Ferris crossed the hallway in 7 steps and put his hand briefly on Kowalski's shoulder, the way a man touches another man to confirm that what they both just witnessed was witnessed together, that it was not private or imagined. The touch lasted approximately 2 seconds. He did not say anything. The woman inside the office behind the frosted glass door had heard the sound Shannon made and had come out and was now moving quickly down the hallway toward Bruce Lee and Shannon. She saw her daughter's arm and she made a sound that was different from Shannon's. She looked at Bruce Lee. He said something to her. She looked at Kowalski, still on one knee. Kowalski rose. He looked at his own hands for a moment. Then he looked at Bruce Lee. He said, "What are you?" Not who. What? Bruce Lee held his daughter and looked at the officer for a moment. Then he said, "The same thing you are. A man who made a mistake." He walked down the hallway toward the stairwell. He did not look back. Kowalski submitted his incident report 4 days later. The report described an administrative error resulting in an injury to a minor, and it named no specific physical confrontation in the hallway because there was no specific physical confrontation in the hallway to name, not in any legal sense, not in any way that the report's categories had a field for. What had occurred was not recorded in the language available to it. Shannon's arm was set and cast at Children's Hospital Oakland that afternoon. She would tell, when she was older, the story of that morning the way children eventually tell the stories of frightening things, without drama as information. She said her father had been very calm. She said he had spoken to her in Cantonese while they waited for the doctor. She said she had not been afraid because he was not afraid, and that was the whole of it. Ferris left the Oakland Force 14 months later and enrolled in a martial arts school in Berkeley. He would not say, when asked, exactly why. He would say only that he had encountered a situation in which he had understood that his training had not prepared him for the quality of attention that a truly skilled practitioner brings to a confrontation, and that he had decided that was worth understanding better. He studied for 11 years. Bruce Lee told the story once, 6 months after it happened, to a room of 12 students at his school in Los Angeles. He told it not as a story about himself. He told it as a demonstration of what he called the difference between a pattern and a principle. He said that a man trained in patterns would recognize a situation when it matched the pattern. A man trained in principles would recognize a situation regardless of its shape. He said the 2 officers in that hallway were trained in patterns. He said there was nothing wrong with them. He said the pattern had failed them, not the other way around. He said that what Kowalski had asked him from the floor, the question he had asked, was the most honest thing a man could say in that moment. He said he asked the right question. He asked it too late. That sentence, in various forms and attributions, was repeated in dojos and training halls and gyms in Los Angeles and Hong Kong and London and Johannesburg for the better part of 30 years. The specific version of it migrated and mutated the way spoken things do, picking up details in some tellings and losing them in others. Arriving finally in the memoirs and retrospectives of men who had trained under Bruce Lee and remembered it as a thing he had said often, though he had said it once, in a room of 12 people, about a Tuesday morning in Oakland that none of them had been present for. Kowalski retired from the Oakland Police Department in 1984. In 1980, he gave a single interview to a small martial arts publication based in San Jose. The interviewer asked him about the incident in 1969. Kowalski was quiet for a moment, and then he said he thought about it regularly. The interviewer asked what he thought about. Kowalski said he thought about the hand that stopped 2 fingers from his jaw and did not continue. He said he thought about that choice, the decision to stop, which was not a hesitation. It was not a failure of will or force. It was a decision made by a man who could have continued and decided not to, which is a different kind of demonstration than finishing, and in some ways a harder one. He said he thought it was the most honest thing anyone had ever shown him about what it means to be competent. He said that for a long time he had been angry about that morning, and that eventually the anger had changed into something he did not have a precise name for. He said it was close to gratitude. The interviewer asked if he had ever tried to contact Bruce Lee. Kowalski said no. He said some things are complete the way they are. There is something that a confrontation teaches that practice cannot, and it is this: the thing you are carrying into a situation is visible to the person standing across from you. Not the weight of it, not the category, but the fact of it. A man who carries certainty carries it in the way he moves through space, in the gap between what he perceives and what he measures, in the fraction of a second he spends confirming what he has already decided. A man who has trained himself to remain in the question, to measure before confirming, to treat every situation as a thing that is still becoming rather than a thing that has already been named, that man moves differently. He occupies space differently. He is, in the most technical sense available, a different instrument. The corridor in Oakland on a Tuesday in February of 1969 was 42 feet long. It smelled of floor wax and old paper. It held 7 people. Shannon Lee grew up and became a writer and a producer and the keeper of her father's work and his ideas and his name. She has spoken many times about his quality of stillness, his capacity for precision in small gestures, his habit of treating every person and every situation as something worth the specific attention required to understand it. She did not speak publicly about that Tuesday in Oakland for many years. When she did, she said that what she remembered most clearly was not the noise her arm made, though she remembered that. She said what she remembered was her father's face when he came through the door. She said there was no alarm in it. She said he looked at everything in that hallway, at her and at the 2 officers, and at the distance between them, the way a man looks at a map, which is to say he looked at it all at once and understood where everything was before he moved a single step. She said she had been afraid, and then he looked at her, and she was not. That is the thing that does not appear in the incident report. That is the thing that does not translate into the language of commendations or citations or personnel files. The capacity to be the still point in a moment that has come apart, to move through it with a quality of intention so complete that the people around you reorganize themselves according to it, not by force, but by example. That is not a technique. It is not a style or a pattern or a syllabus. It is the product of 23 years of daily work arriving, without announcement, in a 42-foot hallway on a Tuesday morning in February and doing what it was always going to do. The lights kept humming. The traffic on the avenue below kept moving. The forklift in the loading bay 3 blocks west kept working its slow course back and forth across the concrete. The world was indifferent to what had happened in that hallway, as the world always is. And the man walked down the stairs carrying his daughter and his jacket and nothing else. There are 2 things a man can take from a moment like that. The first is the version of the story that makes him smaller. The second is the version that makes him more honest. Raymond Kowalski chose the second. It took him a few years. But he chose it. That is the only choice that matters. Not the one you make in the corridor, the one you make in the years that come after. Next week we are going to tell the story of what happened the afternoon Muhammad Ali walked into Bruce Lee's school in Culver City and asked for a demonstration. What Ali said when he left to the man who drove him has never been printed in any biography. Stay close.